obstruct and do everything we can to oppose any of these authoritarian actions against our cities when it's threatening our people, our freedoms, and our democracy. It is why we must fight back. It is why we're here this morning, because we know it will require legislative action, legal action, and the local organizing that is happening on the ground that we are supporting and we will continue to do. And with that, I want to introduce to you a congresswoman who has been holding the line here in Washington, D.C. for many years and will continue to be a champion for justice. Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. 3 weeks ago, despite historically low crime for purposes opposed by 8 of 10 D.C. residents, President Trump declared a crime emergency in D.C. as a pretext for federalizing D.C.'s locally funded police department. He deployed more than 2,000 National Guard troops, put guns in their hands, and sent masked ICE officers to forcibly take community members from our streets. President Trump has used D.C. residents as props in a political play to showcase his own power. While the president claims that federal control of D.C. is necessary to combat crime, his own actions severely jeopardize public safety in the district. Earlier this year, the president and Republicans in Congress intentionally limited D.C.'s ability to spend its own local funds, forcing D.C. to cut roughly $1 billion halfway through its fiscal year from its own budget, which could have further funded D.C. police, fire, and emergency response services and other public safety issues. He pardoned nearly 1,600 individuals who attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6, including hundreds of convicted of assaulting police officers. He fired and demoted dozens of D.C.'s most experienced career prosecutors, contributing to a larger backlog of criminal cases in court and denying victims of crime timely access to justice. No emergency exists in D.C. that the president did not create himself. As D.C.'s sole member of Congress, I have led the federal legislative response to Donald Trump's unlawful, unwarranted, and unprecedented actions. I introduced a termination resolution to end the federalization of MPD with Judiciary Committee Ranking Member Jamie Raskin, a longtime ally of the district who is here with us today. I introduced a bill to require the National Guard troops to deployed in D.C. to address crime to wear body cameras, which would provide much-needed transparency and accountability. Yesterday, I introduced 2 bills to give D.C. full control over its own National Guard and police. And last week, I wrote the Defense and National Guard Bureau demanding answers about the scope, the legal parameters, mission, and cost of National Guard deployment. More than 700,000 people count themselves, all of ourselves, as D.C. residents. We are Americans worthy and capable of the same autonomy granted to the residents of the states. Our local police force should not be subjected to the federalization and action that wouldn't be possible for any other police department in the country. The only permanent remedy that would give D.C. the same rights and protections enjoyed by other American jurisdictions is making my D.C. statehood bill law. To be content with less than statehood is to concede the equality of citizenship that is the birthright of D.C. residents as American citizens. Although D.C. lacks statehood, makes it more vulnerable to the president's abuse of power, he has frequently made it known that his authoritarian ambitions do not end with D.C. Thank you to Congresswoman Ramirez for inviting me to speak today. Your constituents in Chicago are also Americans who are worthy of governing their own local affairs, and I'm proud to be here with you today defending Chicago's right to the same protections I've argued D.C. residents deserve for decades. Thank you very much.
I'm Congressmember Judy Chu, and I stand with the ACLU and all of you here today to say no to President Trump's authoritarian takeover of my community of Los Angeles, of Washington, D.C., of Chicago, and any community across the country. I represent a district in Los Angeles County, and I want to tell you, it was just yesterday that U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer ruled that Trump's use of military troops in Los Angeles was illegal.
That's right.
Trump can act as a national police force with the president as its chief. He barred the Pentagon from using National Guard members and Marines for performing local police functions like arrests and crowd control. In his 52-page ruling, he warned that Trump appears intent on creating a national police force with the president as its chief, and that by doing what he did, Trump violated a long-standing law meant to prevent domestic law enforcement by the military. Well, yesterday I just returned from Los Angeles. That is where Trump sent 4,000 National Guardsmen and 700 Marines to our area when our local law enforcement had everything well under control. But why did he do it? Just for the purposes of intimidation. Of the 4,000 Guards members in LA, many were pulled away from the civilian roles that actually keep communities safe, like nurses, EMTs, teachers, service workers, food and agriculture workers. They were yanked from saving lives and serving neighbors just for Trump's political theater. He is ripping National Guard soldiers away from their jobs and families so he can trample on our constitutional rights and disappear our neighbors off the street. And it is a waste of your taxpayer dollars. This stunt is costing taxpayers tens of millions of dollars that could be used to expand health care, fund our schools, or increase housing. So this is not about reducing crime or keeping our neighbors safe. It's about enacting the largest cut to health care in our nation's history and shoveling trillions of dollars in tax breaks to the ultra-rich. Donald Trump is needlessly deploying thousands of troops and tanks onto our street to distract from the harms that his policies are causing. Never before in our nation's history has the military been used in this way. These are the tactics of a dictatorship. And while this is going on, masked agents have flooded our streets. They are terrorizing people and they are refusing to identify themselves. It's all about intimidation, racial profiling, and harassment. But we cannot let that happen, not in LA, not here in DC, not in Chicago, not in America. This ruling from yesterday shows just how important it is that we keep fighting against Trump's illegal and authoritarian actions here in Washington, D.C. and other major cities. Because when we keep fighting, we can win, just as we did yesterday. So we will not be silenced. We stand with all Americans peacefully dissenting against this administration. Together, in the streets, in the courts, and in Congress, we will stop this authoritarian power grab.
And now I'd like to introduce Congressman Glenn Ivey, who represents parts of Baltimore.
Good morning. My name is Glenn Ivey. I'm the congressman who represents Prince George's County, which is the eastern border of Washington, D.C. I have two of my kids that live here in the Washington, D.C. One of my grandkids lives here, and I was a federal prosecutor down the street for 4 years here in Washington, D.C. So I understand how this ought to work. When I was prosecuting there, D.C. was having somewhere in the range of 450 to 500 homicides per year. Crime's been going down dramatically since then, certainly in the last couple of years. And it's been going down for a couple of reasons. One is that they've been doing an outstanding job of integrating enforcement with intervention and prevention programs that have been moving things down, getting the guns off the street, but more importantly, making sure that you don't just get there after the shots have been fired and somebody's on the ground. You try and reach out to these kids who are in trouble before they get to that point and take care of it then. The Biden administration had put programs in place to help do that. We know it's not serious for the Trump administration because one of the first things he did was cut the funding for those kind of programs. And we also know this isn't a serious effort because one of the first things they did was eliminate the Office of Gun Violence Reduction, which had also played a key role in reducing gun violence in these cities. And instead of doing that, what he's done instead is to put soldiers out on the street, soldiers who don't have the training or the ability to help to deal with policing. For example, they don't know anything about chain of custody. If they seize any evidence, there's a good chance it'll get suppressed because they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to Mirandize suspects. So what you could end up with those two scenarios in place if they get involved in policing is serious crimes like murders and rapes actually getting thrown out on constitutional grounds. We want people on the streets who can help to deal with issues of affecting law enforcement that are trained to do it. Now, if you want to bring in FBI or DEA or ATF, we'd love to have them in Prince George's County. We got a lot of that here in Washington, D.C. Those are people who can make a difference. But what I've seen with these guys on the street here, my wife and I went out for dinner a couple of weeks ago down at the wharf, and I saw about 30 of these troops dressed in camouflage with combat military weapons, M4s, and driving combat vehicles. Armored vehicles. Now, you would have thought the Taliban was about to attack or something. And one of the real problems with the M4 guns is twofold. One is, you know, for regular civilian police, there's a force continuum that they can use. They don't have to go to deadly force right away. They've got tasers and pepper spray and the like. We want to use that. But the other big one, too, is M4s are so powerful. If you shoot somebody, even if you hit the right guy, the bullet's going to keep going through the body and go and potentially hit other people. And so on the wharf that day, when they're walking around with these weapons of military impact on that street, we had people who were civilians just like me sitting there eating dinner, wondering if these guys really knew what to do if something actually happened of a regular kind of crime scenario. Let's move away from this kind of nonsense. Let's get off the show. The show costs $1 million a day here in the District of Columbia, which is crazy, while they're withholding $1.1 billion of DC's own money, which the mayor said, if you release it, I want to hire more cops and teachers. Those are exactly the people we need to help deal with these issues. And the last point I'll make on is this. This is a long-term issue. We need long-term solutions to address it. Not 30 days, not 60 days, not cops or fake cops, soldiers who are out here on the street just for 5 or 10 minutes, basically walking tourist traps here in town instead of actually helping to get the criminals off the street. Let's move towards that. Let's give the cities the funding back that they were using to bring crime down. Let's give them back the money that they need to get more officers on the street. The Trump administration is putting up $50,000 signing bonuses to get these guys to join ICE, but they won't do it for local police departments like this one or Prince George's County because we're all competing for more cops. Let's help us out that way. Help us put more cops on the street instead of the fake show of National Guard troops walking around in tourist areas in camouflage and armored vehicles, which you know they can't use for actual policing. Thank you. Oh, and I want to introduce Nydia Vasquez from New York.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Congressmember Nydia Velasquez representing the Congressional District number 7 in New York City. So I come from New York. It means I know this man, Donald Trump. Every time he feels threatened, he manufactures a crisis. Right. And that is exactly what he's doing here. He knows that what is in the mind of the American people is about releasing the Epstein files. He knows that what is in the mind of the American people is the cost of groceries, a crisis that he himself created with the illegal and arbitrary tariffs that he has imposed. And if he truly cares about tackling the issue of the crime rates in America, he will be sending the troops to states that are run by Republicans, because that is where the highest crime rates exist. It's now been 23 days since Donald Trump launched his federal takeover of Washington. In that time, we have seen the National Guard troops brought in from across the country to patrol the streets. They have been so underutilized that some are now reduced to picking up trash and cleaning the National Mall. Meanwhile, in immigrant neighborhoods, masked immigration officers are arresting parents on their way to school with their children, harassing street vendors, and tearing families apart. Federal law enforcement officers have been pulled away from investigation into things like public corruption, counterintelligence, even drug trafficking, just to patrol city streets. All of this comes at a staggering cost to the American people. Millions of taxpayer dollars every day. And for what? An overwhelming majority of DC residents oppose this occupation, and most say it makes them less safe. Yesterday, as Judy Chu related, a federal judge ruled that it was illegal. But what does Donald Trump cares about what is illegal or legal in this country? A man that was convicted of 34 counts. This is not about crime. This is about control. Trump is a wannabe dictator and is using Washington, D.C. as a testing ground for his authoritarian policies. He did it in Los Angeles. He's doing it here, and it's only a matter of time before he tries to take over a city near you. This is about spreading fear and punishing democratic cities into submission. And it must be noted, as I mentioned, many of the states with the highest rates of violent crimes are in fact run by Republicans. We are not going to bow down. We reject the unwarranted, costly federal takeover of Washington, D.C. We will not accept it here, in Chicago, in New York, or in any other city across our nation. And we know our constituents will not accept it either. Right. They do not want the military deployed to their neighborhoods. They don't want their fundamental rights trampled. They want Donald Trump to get the hell out of our cities and let local government run our cities. Right. And with that, let me present to you the Congress member from Chicago, Chuy Garcia.
Good morning. Thank you to my neighbor and colleague, Delia Ramirez, for convening this press conference and the ACLU. I'm Chuy Garcia, the first member of Congress from the Midwest who is a Mexican immigrant, and I represent a district where 1 in 3 people are foreign-born, most of them from Mexico. It's clear that Trump is escalating his attacks against Chicago because he needs a distraction, as you've heard, from the Epstein files, from the plunging popularity numbers, and because the courts are jeopardizing his pet priorities, his ability to mobilize the Guard, and to the question of tariffs. This escalation is not about public safety or about law and order. It's an authoritarian power grab that has profound consequences, that seeks to target and profile working class immigrant and brown communities. It's the same racist and xenophobic playbook that Trump and Stephen Miller have used before. Terrorize immigrants, pursue deportation quotas, divide people. That's their specialty. It's no coincidence that the attempts to send troops to Chicago on one of the largest Mexican Independence Day festivities in the country is taking place now. Deploying the National Guard in Chicago will not make the city safer. It fuels Trump's violent attacks on our communities and sends people back into the shadows. If he's serious about reducing crime, he would stop weaponizing the military. Instead, he will restore funding to healthcare, education, job programs, and community violence intervention programs. Chicago will not allow this power grab. Crime rates in Chicago have been on the decline because these investments have been made. It is clear that Trump cannot deploy armed forces to Chicago, LA, DC, or Baltimore, or any other states or cities, and that it requires the consent of Congress and the Constitution. There is no such authorization, and that's why we stand here today in defense of the Constitution and of our civil rights. Muy buenos días. Esta mañana es muy claro que Trump está intensificando los ataques contra Chicago porque necesita distraer a la gente de los archivos de Epstein y la caída de su popularidad. Esta escalada no se trata de seguridad pública ni de ley y orden. Es una toma de poder autoritaria con profundas consecuencias que ataca y discrimina a las comunidades de clase trabajadoras, inmigrantes y latinas. Es la misma estrategia que han usado Trump y Miller. No es casualidad que intenta enviar tropas a Chicago antes de una de las celebraciones del Día de la Independencia de México. ¡Qué coincidencia! Desplegar la Guardia Nacional en Chicago no nos hará más seguros, al contrario, alimenta al violento ataque de Trump contra nuestras comunidades y obliga que la gente vuelva a esconderse. La ley es clara. Trump no tiene esta autoridad. Movilizando a la Guardia Nacional, solo busca la confrontación y la violencia. Por eso la repudiamos y vamos a celebrar los días festivos con toda nuestra alma y corazón. Ahora quiero presentarles a mi colega de Illinois. Now I'd like to introduce to you my colleague from Illinois, Raja Krishnamurti.
Do you want to say that in Spanish? I started to. Good morning, hola. I'm Raja Krishnamurti, representative for the 8th District of Illinois. I want to observe those 3 rules of public speaking: be short, be sweet, and be gone. 3 points. First of all, can you give a big round of applause to Delia Ramirez and ACLU for organizing today's press event? What a turnout. Secondly, let's be very clear about the law. The deployment of National Guard troops in Chicago and in other places violates the Posse Comitatus law. What the heck is that? Posse Comitatus is the law that prevents federal troops from being used for domestic law enforcement. None of the emergencies that are specified by that law apply in this case. The Trump administration claims that it needed to actually send federal law enforcement to guard whom? ICE agents. To guard ICE agents. As many of you know, your taxpayer dollars have now made ICE the 15th largest military force in the world. And so that's why a judge yesterday threw out that reasoning and tossed the lawsuit in favor of the plaintiffs, in that case, California and Los Angeles. Now let's come to the third and final point. You choose what you don't change. In this case of the National Guard, we have come together instead to guard our nation and our values. And so today I'm introducing an amendment to the NDAA requiring that National Guard troops, in order to be placed in any jurisdiction, must receive the consent of the chief executive officer of that jurisdiction, in this case the governor or the mayor. It cannot be just deployed at the president's whim. The National Guard, who is comprised of good, honorable people who are being pulled from their everyday lives, cannot be used as the president's paramilitary force, cannot be used as the president's secret police, cannot be used in a way inconsistent with either the law or the Constitution. And so I say to my Republican colleagues, I implore them to look at the facts of the situation. Today, he is targeting Democrats, democratically run cities. He's targeting people he doesn't like. But tomorrow it could be you. And if you don't believe me, just ask John Bolton. Ask John Bolton, the president's former national security advisor, whose house was raided last week by the FBI. The president will choose whomever is out of favor with him to go after them. And so I ask them to consider this situation and remember that party should always come second to country. Country over party. And that's why we're here. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to introduce my good friend and colleague from Chicago, the best city in the world, Jonathan Jackson.
Thank you, Congressman Chris Murphy. I stand here in solidarity with my colleagues, the Honorable Congresswoman Dalia Ramirez and the ACLU. Think about this for a moment. We are now asking the United States military to confront the United States citizens on American soil. This is going in the wrong direction. We need assistance in Chicago, but why don't you talk with the mayor, talk with the governor, talk with the county board president. Our numbers are going in the right direction as homicides and murders are going down. One death by homicide is too many. 30,000 Americans are killed every year by gun violence. We have a scourge of gun violence in the United States of America. It's been said before, 8 out of 10 of the most dangerous states per capita are Republican-led. This is a political ploy. We must put an end to this. We must abide by the U.S. law. This is a dangerous sign that the president is signaling to turn American troops on American citizens on American soil. I would now like to introduce my colleague who's taken this leadership role, the Honorable Congresswoman Dalia Ramirez.
Thank you. Well, we're ending this press conference, but I think you heard really clearly from my colleagues here, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Baltimore, D.C., California, or New York. We're not going to watch this wannabe king attempt to occupy democratic cities because he wants to. You have this man who says, well, I wish the governor would ask me to come. I mean, he has said no, so I won't go. And then days later, he's like, well, I'm just going to go. That's what wannabe dictators do. But I think you heard it very clearly from my colleagues today. We are going to use every legislative action, whether it is introducing amendments right now, whether it is in the appropriation process. We're going to continue to use litigation in the way that we saw in California. And let me be very clear. What the California ruling says is that the National Guard could, in fact, go to cities like Chicago. However, It cannot get in the way of local law enforcement. It could add and continue to add to what ICE is already doing, which, by the way, has $150 billion of your taxpayer dollars to do their immigration enforcement of literally ripping families apart from each other. But they can do that. They cannot do anything related to law enforcement. I want to be very, very clear. So as we end, I want to say this. Congressman Christian Murphy talked about what happens with dictatorships. Fascism always requires a public enemy. Today, he will say that it's your immigrant neighbors. Apparently, it's also museums. It's higher education. It is anyone that stands in the way and dares to be able to demonstrate dissent. But tomorrow, it is anyone that gets in the way of fascism. This is why together we are saying enough is enough. We don't need the National Guard in the city of Chicago or any of these cities. What we need is the resources that actually prove to reduce violence across the country. What we need is health care. What we need is education. What we need is infrastructure funding. What we need is for them to release the Epstein files. That is what we need and we should be doing here in Congress, and we'll continue to fight for it every single day. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you. You good, man? I'm trying my best.